Chapter 11. It was late morning when we finally left the garden. The door that led outside was badly warped and stuck tight, but with some effort she managed to budge it. A thick covering of ivy pulled away from the house as the door opened. Now she could see why she had never noticed the door before. The vines had grown so thickly over this side of the house that it had completely concealed it. This was the back of the house, too, where the space between the banks and the house itself was so narrow and the drop so precipitous that Rue hadn't spent much time there. Outside the sun shone bright, but the air felt cool against her hot, damp skin. As she started back towards the front entrance of the house, she plotted how she might return to the garden. It would be tricky to get past Mrs. Wixton again. Maybe she could make some sort of deal with the old lady. She wouldn't run off again if Mrs. Wixton would give her an hour a day to herself. She could do a lot with an hour. She could clear the garden more thoroughly, getting rid of all the dead branches and leaves. The garden would need water too. The little trickles from rainwater weren't enough. She could haul in water from the river. Rue had just rounded the corner of the house when a voice came from down by the banks. "Was this your little hidey-hole?" Turning sharply, Rue saw Violet kneeling by the jutting rock that had marked the little cave. "You must be part snake to have squeezed in there," Violet said. "Mrs. Wixton told," Rue said. Mrs. Wixton has been fired." "Really?" Rue's voice brightened at the news, but Violet's expression was uncharacteristically grim. "We found her looking around some empty rooms this morning. Miss Valentine got suspicious." Violet shook her head, her brown eyes severe. "Do you realize we've been turning the house inside out all morning, looking for you? Miss Valentine had been frantic. She thought you might have drowned." "And now she'll see that I'm fine," Rue replied. She met Violet's gaze, but Violet looked away. "What?" Rue asked. Her stomach suddenly felt queasy. "What will she do?" She watched Violet's mouth tighten. "Will she send me away?" "This is not a good place for you, Rue." "Yes, it is," Rue insisted, her voice rising. "No, Rue. It's really not a good place for anyone." "You stay," Rue accused. "I'm paid to stay. I have 3 little sisters back on Donkey and a mom who's raising them on her own. I need this job. I'm needed here. You're not." Rue thought of the garden, of the freshly cleared earth, bare now but full of possibilities. "I am needed here," she thought. "Come on," Violet said. She walked over to Rue and took her hand, squeezing it once. "Let's go inside and get this over with. Miss Valentine will be so relieved to see you, she might forget to tear you to bits and feed you to the gulls." Miss Valentine was relieved. In fact, at the sight of Rue, she rushed up and hugged her, but the hug was brief, and the fury quickly followed. "We've tried with you, Rue. We've tried. Even Mr. Fanshawe can't deny we've tried, but now I'm done. What were you thinking? Do you realize what a panic you put us into? We thought you were dead. No, this won't work. We should have never taken you here in the first place." Rue opened her mouth to protest, but Miss Valentine held up her hand. "Mr. Fanshawe gave me leave to make this decision. I hate to do it, but you forced my hand. I've made arrangements for the Burrows to take you back." "No!" Rue cried. "You'll be able to go to your own school in your own town. It's where you belong." "I belong here," Rue insisted, and then she surprised everyone, including herself, by bursting into tears. For a moment, Miss Valentine and Violet just stared at her, not knowing what to do. "The Burrows are good people, Rue," Miss Valentine said, her voice softening. But Rue was not crying about the Burrows as much as she hated the thought of living with them and all the other foster children again. She was not crying because she would have to leave Cough Rock, which she had grown to love. Her tears were for the garden. She felt it tug at her like nothing ever had before. If she left it, no one would care about it. No one would want to try to help it. It would remain a graveyard, not quite dead and not quite alive, which seemed to Rue to be worse than death. Violet wrapped her arm around Rue's shoulder and led her upstairs. She didn't try to console Rue. Violet saw that it would do no good. Instead, she removed Rue's muddy shoes and put her straight to bed. She pulled up the blankets to Rue's chin, kissed her softly on her forehead, as though she were sick, and let her be. For a long while Rue lay very still, staring up at the ceiling, while her body went through the small hiccuping aftershocks of a hard cry. She tried to tuck her thoughts in, as she always did, making them very small, but for the first time in her life, it wouldn't work. She could feel her thoughts flexing against their confinement, the way a foot pushes against a shoe that it's outgrown. She could not keep her mind from the garden. She imagined the sun beating down on the soil now that the weeds and the leaves were cleared. What if it didn't rain for a while? The areas she had cleared would become dry as dust. Had she made things worse by trying to help? Her worries went around in circles. Eventually the small hiccups began to subside, and her breathing grew quiet. That was when she heard the crying again. It stopped her thoughts, made her sit up and listen harder. The crying was steady, emotionless, but imploring, like a bird calling out to another bird. Throwing off her covers, Rue jumped out of bed. She felt a sudden, angry determination to find its source once and for all. She hurried to the girls' dormitory and went straight to the secret door in the beadboard cabinet. This time she entered the passageway with more confidence. She headed straight for the door at the end of the passage, but at the sight of the black round chute to the garden she hesitated. She could go down there now. She could haul water in from the river and pour it on the soil. It wouldn't be enough, but it might help a little. The crying grew more insistent, as if the person knew she was there. Forcing her attention back to the door, Rue put her hand on the knob and turned it, expecting it to be locked again. But this time the knob turned all the way. The crying suddenly stopped. Whoever was on the other side must have been watching the door, waiting for her. It made her stomach feel tight, and she wavered, thinking about the bite mark on her uncle's face. Pressing her ear to the door, she listened. She didn't hear anything, but once again she sensed someone listening for her as well. I'm fast, she reassured herself. I'm fast and small. If I have to, I can outrun whoever this is. She took a deep breath and turned the knob, then inched the door open, so that if something started to come out, she could slam the door fast. On the other side of the door was a chair, and sitting in the chair was a boy. He stared at her with a look of both terror and anticipation, his dark, deeply shadowed eyes still damp from crying. In an instant, though, his expression changed to irritation. "Who are you?" he demanded. He looked to be a little younger than Rue, and was as skinny as she was. While Rue was hard and wiry, he looked withered. His blue pajamas drooped on his thin frame. "Stop staring at me!" he screamed. "Are you the one who's always humming?" Rue asked. "Who are you? I don't know you." "I live here," Rue said, though that would change very soon. "No, you don't. There's only me and my father here." "Who's your father?" "Emmett Fanshawe. Who do you think? There's only me and him, and the help. Oh!" He sat up straighter and looked at her very imperiously. "Did they hire you to clean? I hope so. Violet is too clumsy. She's broken 5 of my bones since she started here." "That's a lie," Rue said. "And I'm not your maid. I'm your cousin." She started to close the door then, but the boy called out, "Wait!" Rue stopped, glaring back at him. "What?" "You can't be my cousin," the boy said, his voice less disdainful now. "I don't have any cousins." "I'm your cousin because our fathers were brothers." The boy thought about this. "I remember once hearing something about my father's brother." He looked up at Rue, and she braced herself for him to say something awful about her father. Instead, the boy stood and said, "All right, then. You can come in and see my coyote." Rue drew her head back, one eyebrow raised dubiously. "You have a coyote in your room?" "A small one.